Welcome to the Sensible Center podcast, where two middle-aged guys drunkenly talk politics and political reform. Grab an adult beverage and enjoy the show. Further information can be found at sensiblecenterpack.com. You can reach us at sensiblecenterpack@gmail.com or follow us on X at USASCPack. Hello there, Bob.
Kevin, getting into fall now.
It is fall football season. Oh, we're going into sports talk again. I know you're all excited about the Pack. They're already,
You've reached the Packcast.
Yeah, you've reached the Packcast. They're getting excited here in Wisconsin, let me tell you.
I bet they are. They should be.
They're right after all the meat raffles, they watch the Packers game on Sunday.
It's easy to be optimistic early in the year before injuries and things start happening. I'm not getting too
Hey, don't curse them. Don't curse them.
That's fair. In the Cubbies, they're one game away from clinching a playoff spot.
I know. They're having a little bit of a resurgence prior to the playoffs. So hopefully they enter the playoffs on a high note. So, anyways, well, that's the only good news that we have for this cast. We decided to kind of do a special cast on political violence based upon what has happened. Definitely over the last week, but, over the last, I would say, year or so, that we seem to be hitting sort of some type of inflection point in this country in regards to political violence. And we'll talk about the Charlie Kirk assassination, I guess, would be the term for it, in a little bit. But I kind of just wanted to back up. Bob, I actually kind of looked up what political violence, sort of the definition of political violence, because watching the news and listening to podcasts and whatnot, you kind of hear the term bandied about, and it's kind of like, okay, what defines political violence? So I thought this definition was fairly good, and then we can kind of get into the Charlie Kirk and kind of how that happened, why it happened, is it political violence, and kind of step back and kind of talk about, in general, political violence in this country. So the definition I've got here, and I don't remember where I got it from, was violence which is perpetrated to achieve political goals. I agree with that. That seems pretty simple. Yeah. It can include violence which is used by the state, and which I never thought about this, but I guess political violence is also by the state, right? It's not only non-state actors, which is kind of what we're talking about here, by the state against non-state actors and civilians, such as forced disappearance, psychological warfare, police brutality, I guess they listed that, targeted killings, torture, ethnic cleansing, and genocide. All fun things, right?
Yeah, violent. I would add a word to that definition. I would say with intent to violence with intent to further political goals. So
not even perpetrated to achieve, but the intent to achieve.
Yep, you got it. Because oftentimes, as I think is evidenced by history, when political violence occurs, the opposite actually happens, and it harms your.
It's unintended consequences.
Yep,
huh?
You got it.
And then it goes on to say violence used by non-state actors against civilians and states, kidnappings, assassinations, terrorist attacks, torture, and guerrilla warfare. And then, there was one more part that said non-action on the part of the government can be characterized as a form of political violence, which I thought was kind of interesting. So I guess non-action meaning, let's say we have a disaster or something, and the president or the government decides not to respond to that. That could be seen as political violence, be it, thinking about recent memory, like fires in California or Hurricane Katrina or anything like that. Not to be ideological or anything, but I guess non-action could be seen as political violence. So you kind of buy into that, or no? Do you not? You think it's got to be action?
It's got to be action.
Okay. I thought it was an interesting way to look at it.
Violence is violence. Violence is action. There's a fine line between a threat and action.
Right. So you think it should be action. I kind of see the point of the non-action because it could be viewed as that by people, right?
Yeah.
If your government's not responding to your pain or your need, you could see that as violence against you. But I sort of agree that I think it should be action rather than non-action. So this raises the question, based upon that definition, was the murder of Charlie Kirk political violence, and why? So what's your take on that, based upon kind of what we just read? You think it was perpetrated to achieve political goals? Or do we not know enough at this point?
Yeah, I read a little bit more today, and it wasn't much more. I didn't have a lot of time to do much reading today, but I think it was done more so the guy could impress his friends and his online friends.
Yeah, I mean, there's the gamer community, right? There's Discord and all those messages, right?
Yeah, and apparently, from what I've read, he had a trans.
Yeah, I think that's roommate, partner,
partner. Yeah, I don't know what you would call it, but yeah, partner. And he was in a lot of discords with that particular group of people.
Right.
And even at the end, he admitted to the group of people, "Yep, I did it. I'm about to turn myself in."
Yeah, I mean, one of the messages I read was that he was kind of through with Charlie Cook's hatred. I mean, Kirk, not Cook, is hatred. And I don't know if that's...
I don't think... I don't... Yeah, again, this guy is
obviously political?
Not saying...
Is he doing it because... I would say it would be political if... Because Charlie had political power, right? He had political leverage, right? Can we agree that he was a political actor?
Yeah, I mean, he was making money off of it. He had a huge audience, and he had means or contacts. He'd go to the White House. He would go on Fox News. So, and he had a huge podcast, that sort of thing. So, yes, I would absolutely say that.
Yeah, and with this. I guess the group that he formed was called Turning Point USA, and from what I never really followed him that closely. I knew he was a thing, right, over the last probably, I think in the last election cycle more than anything, right? Yeah. Getting especially the young conservative Christian, I would say, vote out. Would that be fair?
Yep. It's interesting, too, because I believe they had less than 1,000 chapters at high schools and colleges across the country, and there's been an additional 2,500 applications since his death at schools to start chapters.
Right, which gets you to the kind of the unintended consequences.
Yep.
Right. When you take an action, there's a reaction to it, right?
Yeah. One other thing too, and I don't know. I saw a video online earlier this week about apparently, at least this video said that the kid who did this went and spoke to him at one of his events. I don't know, looking at the kid in the video, whether or not it's the same person or not, and I didn't do any background check, but if it was, I can tell you, this individual was very angry to the point where he couldn't make a great argument because of the anger he had, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of the left's frustration with Kirk was that he was very good at driving the direction of the conversation, no matter the topic.
Yeah, right? I mean, watching, especially over the last week, as I said, I wasn't too tuned into him before, but I spent some time over the last week in preparation for this and just sort of understanding where he came from. And I think he was sort of effective in that he called it debating, I guess, or master debating, as
yep.
as South Park pointed out during their episode, sort of lampooning him. But he died under a banner that said "Prove me wrong," which I don't necessarily think is debating, because it's coming from the position that you're already right, and the burden of proof is on me to prove you wrong. And I think that's sort of how he approached things, which I don't think is necessarily a fair way to debate. But you're right; he was effective in kind of pushing that point of view. Um, and I guess his mission was to give a voice to the conservative movements on campus, because at least what I hear from the political right is that our universities are now indoctrination centers. I don't know. I haven't been to a university in a while, and that sort of the conservative voices, the more traditional Christian voices, are being drowned out by the kind of the liberal voices, right? So, which is fine. I mean, he's giving a voice to people who might feel outside of the mainstream at their own universities, I guess.
And there was, I don't know if you read the article in the Wall Street Journal. I don't know if it was today's journal or yesterday's. I think I read it yesterday, but sometimes I read it late enough where it's the next day's journal. And there's a pretty decent article about people getting fired for making comments online about being happy that he died.
Yeah, I mean, we could go ahead. You could go ahead.
A large percentage of those guys, those people, are at universities and high schools. And it's just, again, and I think you pointed it out in a conversation we had, it's not necessarily it's not a study, right? I mean, it's not something that scientific research was done on, but anecdotally, looking at lists of about 1,000 people deep that have had hundreds and hundreds of people call and email their places of employment based upon what they saw online, and they're getting fired. A large portion of these people are teachers, which is interesting.
So let's talk about that a little bit, sort of the reaction side of this. But before we get into that, I just want to get your take on this, because I don't, just to kind of circle back on whether this was political violence, and I'm really been turned off by, and I've had some friends email me and they say they did this to him as if there's some kind of cabal or Democratic or left-wing group that sort of organized this as like a hit.
I think it's rhetoric.
I think that is very dangerous, right? When we start characterizing things as political that aren't, such as, let's say, vaccinations, let's say climate change. There's nothing inherently political about those, right? And when we start characterizing everything as political, people start going to their camps right away, right? That you lose the ability to actually talk about something, analyze it, and make change, right? At least that's what I think, because everyone's going to get defensive, right? Everyone's going to go into their camp. Well, I don't know if what you think of that, but as I was hear this rhetoric and language, I'm like, wait a second,
I've tried not to post or say much online about it. I've had one or two people post things that kind of set me off, because it does frustrate me when people are apparently celebrating the guy's death because he was, such a terrible, horrible person or whatever they're saying, and him not being in the world anymore is a good thing, and that kind of stuff just absolutely disgusts me.
Yeah, no one should be celebrating anything. I don't.
Yeah.
I mean, from what I gathered from who he is and doing a little bit of research, I don't think he was the worst of the worst by far, right?
I think he believed, especially from a religious standpoint, he really truly did believe what he preached. Some of his conversations he had with Maher, for instance, were pretty convincing to me. He's sincere in what he did and said. I know, probably the vast majority of political talking heads out there aren't necessarily that way. I think he was. Right. But I also think he probably found pleasure in dunking on people.
Yeah, like I said, to prove me wrong, the style that he went about it, it sort of felt like, own the libs, drink liberal tears type of feel. Yep. And people are going to react to that, right? There's a difference between having a healthy debate and now, because he's been murdered, he's sort of wrapped into this kind of, he's been elevated up a little bit further than I think he deserves to be. But that's just the nature of things like this, I guess.
Yeah, it's just like it actually starting the show off with a little bit of sports talk is probably quite relevant because it's very similar to that. Um, Kind of my team versus yours, red team versus blue team, no matter what sort of thing.
Right.
And it's sad that we've kind of come there. I really would like it if we could find a way to get away from that a bit.
So as far as this particular incident, we're sort of, at least I'm still sort of undecided whether it's political violence. I don't, Nothing indicates to me that it was done for political objectives. I think I think somebody didn't like what he was saying, but it wasn't like they took him out so they can change something as far as political. I don't know. Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah, I think it was a mix of
right.
Yeah, like hatred and showing off to somebody, to your friends, more or less.
Right.
Crazy kid, right? I mean, literally crazy. You'd have to be to do something like that. But yes, I mean, I think we've also stated that it is kind of a my team versus your team thing, and I know sometimes when my team loses, I have a tough time with it. It kind of ruins my day.
Right.
So, some people who have a tendency to be a little less, have a less ability to control their emotions. I could see how all this rhetoric and heated rhetoric can drum that sort of thing up. And the politicians are absolutely using terms like Nazi and evil.
Right. And people should be really careful with that, and they're not, right? And I don't think they're going to learn this lesson that they should be more careful with it. Unfortunately, we as a country don't tend to learn these lessons from events like this. And I don't even want to get into gun control and mental illness, and because any shooting or mass shooting is going to have typically some element of that in it. And I think we've kind of discussed that ad infinitum in this country, and there doesn't seem to be any political will, and I don't imagine there's going to be any further political will. I think the reaction that we're seeing from this is more along the free speech aspect, as you kind of were hinting, which I think is a really interesting element, and the reaction, as you point out, seems to be sort of against what Charlie actually stood for, from my understanding, right? He was more of a free speech absolutist, right?
Say what you want.
Right.
Yep. No,
so people celebrating his killing is free speech, right?
It's absolutely free speech.
Okay.
That said, I think it's also well established that free speech means the government can infringe upon your speech, but if you're damaging your company or the public's trust in whoever you work for, they can absolutely take action.
But here's the thing. The right has always been, and Charlie especially here, with woke culture, with cancel culture, right? That's what cancel culture was, right? Nobody was being put in jail. People were losing their livelihoods, their ability to make money. They were getting pressure from their employers. Nobody was being put in jail, as I've always said. The government wasn't, although we've talked about during COVID and kind of the jawboning of social media to get them to take down messages and whatnot. Nobody was put in jail. There was an influence campaign, surely. But now we're seeing, and did you see this thing with Pam Bondi? There was a Republican organization that was printing flyers for a vigil for Charlie Kirk, right? Did you see this?
The Office Depot?
Office Depot?
Yep. I did. Those people should be fired.
So,
and they were.
Well, here's the thing, right? So the story was somebody in a Republican organization was coming in to have flyers printed to promote a vigil for the Charlie Kirk. Fine. The employee refused to print those. I guess that's an employee's right. It's also an employer's right to say
You're
our
fired.
policies right.
Yeah.
Now, Pam Bondi getting involved in it is another matter.
Yeah,
That's
completely.
a whole other
Yeah,
matter.
that's
And she's
ridiculous.
actually said several things and had to roll them back in regards to what the First Amendment allows, right? And that is starting to concern me. And when they start saying they're going to go after organizations on the left, and I don't know
I
if you're
saw some
concerned
headlines
about that as
about
I
them
am.
potentially wanting to go after some organizations on the left, the ones that they find are funding people who are rioting, which I think is fair, right? So let's take George Floyd, for example, because that's easy, right? So I think a lot of people on the right believe that the people that were rioting were either paid directly or paid for indirectly by some leftist entity, whether it's an NGO or a George Soros or a mixture of each, some of those. So the White House's argument is if you are funding groups that are going out and committing acts of violence, then absolutely we're going to hold you accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably fair. I think it's a high bar to prove because just because you paid somebody to protest, which is
Right.
legal,
Yeah.
doesn't mean you paid them to commit acts of violence that they may have
Right.
done on their own because they were drunk or high or just made some bad decisions. So that's the argument, right? You got to be able to prove that, and if you can prove that, not just by circumstantial evidence, you're going to have to provide real evidence. Whether it's documents stating we want you to do this, we want you to go set a fire, we want you, that's where it gets difficult. Or they paid somebody individually in the crowd to, they paid the crowd and then paid one person to instigate it without trying to circulate that's what was happening. If they can prove that sort of thing, then maybe.
So you're mentioning proof in courts and things like that here. Do you are you concerned about the U.S. government, which uses our tax dollar, right? Um, let's call it intimidation. Um, Campaigns. You don't have to necessarily shut people down to silence them. You know what I'm saying? Let's say, well, our president just sued the New York Times for $15 billion. He
Yep.
probably will not be anywhere near successful. I don't think he's really had success other than negotiating some settlements with people who have licenses that are issued by the federal government. Uh, but can you see that how just taking those actions could have a silencing effect?
The president suing is different than the government suing. He's suing. Well, I don't. Maybe tell me if
Not
I'm wrong because I
necessarily.
don't know about the New York Times story.
He
To
is
tell
the
you the truth,
president, and he's got this
he is the
supreme
president, but is
executive
he
thing.
suing on behalf of himself or his campaign, or is he suing on behalf of the
Oh, on his
government?
behalf of himself.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't have a problem with that. I think every
You know,
citizen has got the right to
well, he does have a right.
right. And I can tell you, I mean, with legal insurance, it does make it a lot easier to go ahead and just get a lawyer on something that you don't feel is right, where the average person might not. So Trump doesn't have legal insurance, but he's got enough money where he's got high-paid lawyers on retainer.
Right.
What's the difference, right? So it's a nice
And all
perk.
these
It's a nice benefit
corporations
to
do
have.
business with the government in some way, right? I mean,
Sure.
typically.
Yep.
So you don't see him using the power of the position to intimidate people. You just see him as a civilian taking actions that he has a right to.
He had the same behavior long before he was in politics.
Oh, no doubt. He's very
Yeah.
litigious.
It's that's him. That's his nature. I don't have a problem with it. Sue him.
Okay.
That's go for it. I don't.
Okay. So
But no, I see your point.
Yeah.
He is absolutely doing that. He is absolutely trying to intimidate.
Right.
But again, strategy, whether you like it or not.
So I see sort of the aftermath, and we'll kind of get into more broadly political violence shortly. But to wrap up the Charlie Kirk thing, I think you're right. The reaction is sometimes unintended consequences. I don't know what the killer here intended to have done, but I think the initial reaction is probably going to be not what not good for the causes that he was promoting, right? Which I guess in the end of the day is sort of a good result because maybe it'll stop other people from doing such things, right? It's like you think this is gonna, but I don't think he was being rational anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I don't think he was being rational. I don't, I'm, I won't say I'm surprised, but I'm pleasantly appreciative of the fact that there hasn't been any follow-up incidents from either side of the aisle over the last week or so. 'Cause I
Right?
think
Yeah.
it was definitely a concern, for me initially, just knowing kind of how all the emotion was there. Um, I do believe, that the right is generally more adverse to violence than the left. I
Okay.
think if you think about the Minnesota senator that was killed recently, right? That person was a Democrat. The person who did it worked for Tim Walz up there. This individual definitely has leftist leanings.
Well, he comes
The
from
George
evidently a
Floyd
conservative
riots,
family, but whatever.
George Floyd riots, all of that. Uh, there's there does seem to be a trend there when it comes to political violence in the left. Many of the recent school events have been people that have been overtly and outspokenly on the left side of the aisle. I don't know why that is, but I think there, in my estimation, without scientific research, seems to be a trend there.
I would
Um,
say, I mean, I've read things sort of that would disagree with that from a historical perspective, probably, right? I think historically, the right wing has been more militant. I think, yes, I think the trend is now that the left is sort of getting into the business. Although, I mean, we could talk about the history. I guess we have a long history of political violence in this country. I was kind of thinking back and saying, okay, is this a feature of our country versus other countries? And and we could talk about the left versus right thing. I would say the right, at least this is my take. The right is very good at promoting that it's the left that creates all the violence, is creating all the violence now. Because I hear it a lot now, and I'm not going to deny that there are some instances that appear to be coming from anti-fascist or Antifa or you name it, that side of the spectrum. I'd be careful with labeling, tying those to political parties, though, right? Um, that's more of an ideological perspective, not a political party perspective. Um, I get a lot. Well, the Democrats did this or they did that. I'm like, well, there's a large difference between um, somebody who has a extremist view on one issue and then lining that up with a political party that represents a whole bunch of people, right? Can we at least agree on that?
sure, absolutely.
Okay. So I'd like to kind of go into. I'm always surprised that this hasn't happened more in this country, although now that we'll kind of go back over the history, I think it has occurred quite a bit. So I kind of started thinking about the history of political violence in this country. And we actually were formed on political violence, right? The Boston Tea Party would be a number one example, right? Can we all agree that's political violence?
That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, on the surface, it is.
Lexington
think in today's
Concord,
terms,
you know?
it's not, but it would be the same thing as looting a Walgreens.
Well, it was to achieve a political purpose, right? I
Yeah.
mean, there was tax
Yeah.
on tea. They attacked the boat. They threw the tea into the harbor, trying to make a political point. I would say Lexington Concord is kind of similar. We took up our arms against our colonial overseer, right? Our mother country, England. We actually took up arms against them, based upon certain policy, right? I mean, taxation without representation. We listed all these grievances when we, did the Declaration of Independence. It was basically a complaint letter. Here's what we don't feel represented by. Here's, we're under the foot of King George. We're not happy about it, right? And knowing my history, we kind of tried to resolve that. And when push came to shove, we turned to violent measures to resolve it because we couldn't resolve it through political and diplomatic means. Even when you go back to sort of Indian removal, that was sort of a violent policy of the federal government to a certain, well, they weren't really citizens of this country, I guess, removing them from their land.
Yeah, that was not a good thing. That was terrible.
More recently, we've Gretchen Whitmer kidnapping, Gabby Gifford, Paul Pelosi. Wait a second, I'm talking about some violence from the right.
Yeah, well, the guy, the Paul Pelosi thing, I don't think that was a righty. That was
all right.
Well, that idiot that I don't even know why he was let into Paul's house. I have no idea.
Let me just read what I had written on the margins. It says, seems like Republicans say political if they get attacked. Other way, it's just the crazy guy. I swear to God, I just read that off my notes on the side of my sheet of paper.
Yeah, I think there is some truth to that.
Yeah, okay.
What was the one you mentioned before Paul Pelosi?
Gabby Gifford. I don't necessarily
I don't know
that
anything about
political,
who.
right?
I don't know if that was political or not. I remember that.
Steve Scalise, that softball, I would say that was fairly political, right?
Yeah, that was.
Trump, clearly. I don't necessarily know if the guy
the second one was political for sure.
First one.
The first one. The first one was probably something very similar to Charlie Kirk, where the guy was kind of probably crazy, involved in a lot of online chat rooms. But
right.
that's complete.
Now they're throwing in Luigi, right? I mean, as sort of a political. I don't necessarily think that was necessarily political either.
I don't think that's political. That's more personal.
They're throwing that in there. So, can you guess how many presidents have been shot at, and how many have been murdered? Murdered while in office, assassinated.
2.
Lincoln.
Yeah, and Kennedy.
Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. So about 10%
they were killed in office.
Yes.
I didn't know Garfield and McKinley were killed in office.
Yes.
No shot or?
Shot. Then Reagan was shot, right? He wasn't killed. Teddy Roosevelt was actually shot similar to Trump while he was campaigning after he was already president. Teddy was going for his third term, and he was shot in Milwaukee. Trump clearly was shot at while he was running. There were 4 that were not injured, but there were attempted assassinations: Jackson, FDR, Truman, and Ford. So of our 46 different presidents, I guess, about 25% have had attempts on their lives. Wow. Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy.
When you think of
tough job.
It's a tough job. So, we're talking about, and I guess the last one prior to Trump would have been Reagan. So we did have a nice streak, for a while. And I think, clearly we had a height of political violence in the 60s, right? Lots of turmoil. In the 60s, we had JFK, MLK, and RFK, which I guess, all of them can be sort of considered political in one way or another. We had the Civil War, which I would put within political violence, right? um, primarily states seceding from the Union, which caused the reaction from Lincoln to bring in the troops. Um, During the 60s, we had the weather. There were actually
Weather
a lot.
Underground,
There,
yeah.
there were bombings, right?
Saul Alinsky,
You had the Unabomber, right?
yep, that was
The Weather Underground.
political. Yep.
You had the Black Panthers back then.
Timothy
Fairly,
McVeigh.
right. Fairly. There was what was a Patty Hearst organization? I forgot what the SLA or something. Symbionese Liberation Army, or I mean, there were people with guns and going after banks and stuff to prove political points. It was. I don't think we've seen that here, although clearly we're on the uptick. Um, but like you said, stuff like this could set
Yep.
a
It sets
massive
some things
kind
in
of
motion.
right.
Yep.
And then once you start spiraling down, especially in today's day and age, where you have stuff that light the fire even more with the media and social media, right? And then clearly the political divide in this country is probably even more than it was back then.
Yeah, I think the general populace here does not understand what that could be like and how awful it could really be.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I I pray to God we're not heading in that direction,
Yeah,
and
because
that's
otherwise
why.
I'm going to be an illegal immigrant, and the Canadians are going to be like, get them out of here,
Right,
taking our jobs.
that's the time where you're like, well, adios, amigos.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going. So if I have the ability to go somewhere else
I'm out of
for
here.
a while, till
Yep.
because yeah, I mean it has happened. It does happen, and I think often we think here that it can happen here, and unfortunately, I think the the we're heading in that. I've never been a pessimist, but the more I see, the more I think we're starting to head
Yeah, I
in
do
that
too.
direction.
I've thought that way for a while.
And looking back at it, I'm like, why are we heading in that direction?
I've been thinking about it a lot lately since this assassination, actually, and I just don't think people are listening to each other anymore.
What'd
And
you say?
people are not listening to each
Oh,
other anymore. They're not. They're talking at people
right.
and then applying their opinions to whatever that person might be saying, but they're not listening. Because people, it's very obvious. Like people truly do believe that Charlie Kirk was evil, and the world is better without him, and he's better off dead, and the world's better off. And that's just one small example. It's not just him, but people think that, and I think a large group of people, I'm not saying a majority, but there's a significant enough group of people think that tells you there's a root cause for that. And I think on the other side of the aisle, you've got a very similar situation. People feel like their rights are being taken away, and their ability to say what they want and think what they want and live life as they always have is being taken away and infringed upon. And there's not really middle ground anymore because people don't care to find it, because it's my way or you're an evil person, and that's a problem. I don't know how we get past that. People do not seem willing to even consider other points of view anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, I think social media. I would. We had talked about that. I think if everyone pulled back from social media at this point and kind of reassessed things and dealt with people, because I do think if you meet someone one on one, you tend to be able to bridge those gaps more. And you talked about Charlie Kirk. I'm wondering how many of those people actually have kind of spent time. Because I went back and I'm like, okay, I skipped when he was talking to Marr on his podcast, and I went back and sort of listened to that, because you can simply draw judgments on people, right?
Sure.
Without giving, like you said, without listening. you kind of fall into your camp. You're like, oh, he bad. Uh, start throwing out names and things like that. And I don't think that's fair. I think you have to call it like it is, and you're entitled to your opinion, but don't just fall into your camp like knee jerk reaction. And I think social media creates that. And I think, as we talked about, I think the incentives within social media incentivize the extreme viewpoints. And we had talked earlier in the week whether people actually believe what they are saying on social media, right? That's another thing.
Will people actually get off their couch and fight a war? Is it going to be an online flame war, right? Yeah, I don't know.
Right. Are they actually, you said, well, things are getting inflamed. I'm like, well, are those people just trying to get eyeballs on their, because we all know what gets reaction is the most extreme stuff, right? If you have a reasonable point of view, people are like, move on. And that's a little bit of us as human beings, right? And the problem with, us liking that kind of conflict. So, yeah,
if you sit back and really pay attention to your blood pressure when you're reading some of that stuff, you figure it out like pretty quick. I need to stop. Something's going on here. But anyway, I digress.
This sort of gets us into, as we kind of go down the path a little bit here. Also, what's coming into to play is violence ever justified? Right? I think that's a big question, and I think what we're hearing and what some polling has shown recently is that the younger generation in this country has less of a problem with violence than older generation. Now, I don't know if it's always been that way, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
That even during the 60s, clearly it was the younger generation that was pushing it, whether it's just people who are older tend to have more conservative views, and therefore they don't see violence as justified. But the polling that I'm hearing is saying that boomers, 93% never find it acceptable, violence, and now Gen Z, 56% do not find it acceptable. So almost an even split between acceptability or not. Do you think that's something unique to where we're at now, or do you think this has kind of always been inherent in the age divide?
Yeah, I think I think you've got a point with kids. I mean, kids are always going to be a little bit more that way and willing to do it, just be violent. But it's hard to say. It does feel a little bit different, right? But for me, it's the first time I've kind of lived through this sort of thing, I guess, for everybody. So I don't know. There is the thing we're kind of not hitting on, right, is there's the inflation is putting a lot of pressure on people, especially kids at this point, which could make the violent behavior and attitudes a little more prevalent, right? Because they can't afford houses.
Yeah, I've got it written down here. People have nowhere to turn. They feel threatened. Like you said, inflation is a pressure.
Inflaming it as well. Yeah.
Just imagine if we have a steep recession at this point or something like that. That adds more pressure on top of it.
You know that has to come sooner or later.
So you think
people are losing their jobs too. I mean, that's what's really interesting about the economy right now is unemployment is creeping up there. But nowadays, a lot of what's happening, right? Companies, it's part of the return to office bit is instead of having to announce a layoff and go through the stock changes, right? They just say return to office or you have to leave, and now they don't have to announce a layoff because people do it on their own. And then also, they can't collect unemployment when they leave on their own. So therefore, the unemployment rate doesn't go up even though people are unemployed, especially if any severance is given. So things are a little more, I think, in rougher shape than we realize.
So you're saying that might lead to the younger generation because the
Yep.
boomers are a little bit fat and happy, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, think
they've
about
they've
what's happened to
sold
their
their
house.
big house for
Yep.
lots of money, right?
Yep.
They're sitting on a lot of cash,
Yep.
and the younger generation saying, "We can't afford a house. We've got AI, we've got AI breathing down our neck now too, right?"
Hmm.
You start hearing these stories like we talked last time about people, not being able to find jobs, and some of the entry level jobs are being, you know, taken over or outsourced to AI. So yeah, that sort of makes sense that they're like, well, and I think they're a little bit more cynical about the political system, right? They're a little bit more nihilistic, at least some of the younger people I've got in my life. That politics, that's not a solution to anything. That's messed up, right? Voting, they it's harder to get them to vote, and maybe it's always been that way, and we've just gotten older and now looking back. But I voted when I was young, right? I bought into the political system that this is how our voices are heard, and now they're kind of saying, well, what's the point? And they're looking at maybe some of the indoctrination they're getting in colleges. They're looking at everything from an oppressed and oppressor viewpoint, right?
You go
Where
get in
you're
an Uber or a Lyft. I've been in a lot of them lately, and you just talk to the drivers. You can tell the economy is not doing terribly well.
right.
You know.
Those are the people it impacts first, right?
Yep.
They're the front lines. They're going to feel it first.
And it's going to get worse as automation and driving and full self-driving and all that
Oh
sort of
boy.
stuff. You know. Yeah, it's coming fast. It's going to get worse.
So before we kind of wrap up, I just wanted to go back to this question: is violence for political purposes ever justified?
No.
So, if I hate to bring up the Hitler example, right? But during the beer hall push, when he was just starting out, right? If you could have
That's
ended
different
him
in
then,
hindsight.
okay,
In hindsight,
in
because you're
hindsight,
saving many lives.
because
The
you
whole
know
Middle
what
East
it looked
conflict
like, right?
probably wouldn't be happening
That's a
right
good
now.
point.
Think about that, right? The whole Gaza Israel thing wouldn't
Right,
most
it's a
likely would not
domino
even be.
effect, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and that's been going on for what? So that was the 40s, almost 100 years, 80 years or so.
No, that's a
So,
good point. You can't look at it back in hindsight.
yep,
You have to deal with at the
yeah.
time. It was just another movement, right? This is uh, so. I guess you're right from a hindsight perspective, because I'm. Here's my perspective. Like you said, people feel threatened. People feel pushed. Actions by the government. If somebody's taking away your health care and your grandfather dies because he doesn't have appropriate health care, or if our political system can't, as I was talking about the non-actions earlier that you didn't agree with, as a form of political violence because they actually affect people in their lives, right? And you don't feel like you're being represented and the system is corrupt.
You got to fix
And
it. You got to fix the system.
but within our
And gerrymandering.
but within our Constitution, isn't it set up that we rise up
It is.
and take action, not just at the voting booth, take action. And not that I'm calling for it in this podcast, mind you. I'm just saying this is the basis. This is a founding document of this country. Is okay if all the rest of this doesn't work, and I think that's sort of where people are getting at, right? Unfortunately.
Well, here's a different perspective, and maybe this would make a good podcast for the future. What if things go right, and AI and automation takes us to a spot where nobody has to work, and your house is free because the robots build it, and food is free because the robots are farming it. And when you get cancer, AI figures out the code to kill that cancer real quick. You're going to live a long time. You know, those who die do so in freak accidents because falling off a high building or getting hit by a car or something. Think about that. Nobody has to drive anymore. Think about what that will do and how that more or less solves all the problems.
Right? It has the potential, right?
We could get there in 50 years probably.
So what do we need to do to get there? And I wrote down, where do we go from here, right? And that sounds like that's a possible future. I open that up to a possible future, but I don't think that could happen with where our politics is at now, right?
We need some reform, because otherwise every piece of land is going to be owned by very few people, and then there's going to be no spots to build your house on. There's a robot to build your. Yeah, we need some reforms. Gerrymandering needs to end. The Citizens United, we got to find a way to get that overturned. Find a loophole, way around it, something new. Absolutely, change the law.
Because I do think the political violence at the base gets to that, right? When people don't, that was my point with the Constitution. When people don't feel represented, which is kind of what we formed this country on, right? Taxation without representation. When they don't feel like they're being represented, when they don't feel like they're being heard, that's when they turn to violence, right? And until
violence has never solved the problem.
No, it doesn't. But as I said, it's not acceptable, but it's understandable, right? I'm not surprised.
I'm not. I can.
Are you surprised?
I don't know if "understand" is the right word, but yeah, I can understand or process why people would do that. But I would never say it's understandable from the standpoint of, I would not do something like that, right?
Well, I said it's unacceptable, but it's understandable.
Pushed all the way to the edge. You got no family left. You got no way out. You're on the edge of,
right,
like the abyss. I still think there's always a way. There's always a way.
Well,
maybe this is oversimplifying it a bit, but I've had friends before that are like at their wits' end with just, you can't seem to find a job or girlfriend or a wife or whatever else. It's like, you know what, man? If you're really that miserable, maybe this isn't good advice. This is how I look at it. Wherever in the world you can be happy and live for cheap and be able to afford anything you want, why not do it? You can just remove yourself from the situation and find something new, right? It's there. Anybody can do it. I know you don't exactly have much money. You can find a way to raise enough money to get yourself to another spot where things are very cheap, and then start and sit on the beach and sling bears. And find, just there's a way. There's always a way, and killing somebody is never the way.
Right, and I would say channel that energy to a positive, right? You're saying just go somewhere else and start anew, which is a fine alternative too. But if we're going to reform our country and make it better, we can't. We need that energy of dissatisfaction to be channeled into our political system, so we do change, right?
In a constructive manner, yeah.
Right. And the system is there to do it. Unfortunately, people are starting to take alternative means outside of that system.
Yeah, and the ones
to affect change.
I think the ones that they really have problems with, the super uber rich, right, be it Elon Musk or Donald Trump or George Soros or whoever it happens to be, will not be affected even in any little bit of change. Even our congressmen are getting so filthy rich off the dirty stock trades and everything else. If things absolutely collapse, these people will be fine no matter what. And all it's going to do if things absolutely collapse is give them more power, because they'll have even a larger percentage of the resources in the end. So that's the thing where I think we're lacking too, is critical thinking skills and education.
Yeah. I mean, you have to have an educated and informed electorate. And absent that, like, you do stand a chance of people taking up arms to affect change, right?
And if you're spending a large portion of your mathematics class in college talking about politics and social justice and everything else, you're not helping the situation. It's a problem. People are paying $120,000 degrees for social science courses. And if they're lucky, they'll make $50,000 coming out of school. It's a tough situation. We need a lot of reform in this country, and it's not just political reform or political funding reform. It's education reform. It's all of it. We need it.
Unfortunately, my wife and I have always gotten into discussion on, when things are going to actually change in this country, where we're going to, be on the upturn again. And she's always said, well, this shit's going to really have to hit the fan before people get behind change. And I've always been like, no, we could do it through our system. Yay. I'm less optimistic than I've been ever in my life about that happening.
I in part agree with her. I've thought for a long time shit's going to have to hit the fan before there's real change. But I also think if you look back over history,
we're able to pull our ass out of the fire.
Well, it was advancements, right? The Industrial Revolution. You had kind of the internet boom got us out of that trouble in like the 70s and 80s. The internet started taking off real good in the 90s when things took off. So, AI and automation, I think this time has the potential to kind of bring us back up quite a bit. And because of what it can potentially do medically and for quality of life things, potentially this could be the one that really does good for society. Potentially.
Look at us. We've tied back our last two podcasts. AI is going to solve everything.
It might. I mean, there's a lot of.
It might,
there.
or it might. They might just put us out of our misery. Yeah. Either way, one of the two. Pick. It's a binary. Either it's going to be utopia, or they'll put us out of our misery. Either way, it's both good.
Either way, it won't matter. None of this matters.
All right. Anything else? We're a little over an hour now.
I think I'm good.
All right. As always, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. It's kind of a serious topic, but we thought it was important to cover at this time. Hopefully we didn't depress you with the various scenarios too much. There is a light out there, and Bob is actually more optimistic than I am at this point, which is a strange state of affairs. So
remind everybody what our email address is.
It's sensiblecenterpack@gmail.com. So if there's anything you want to hear, any topics you'd like us to talk about, or any other feedback, just send us an email.
Or you want to come on the show.
Or if you want to come on. Yep, we'll have other guests soon. Talk to you later.
Bye.